If only I was a wizard, though. The dirt? Alas, I'm not. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be for taken as medical advice. Everything we're going to talk about today is intended to be for educational and entertainment purposes only. So if y'all have a question or concern, please go see a licensed professional. We are not going to play... Oh, category is still set to Disco Elysium. Hold on. Let me help. Category. Just chatting. There we go. Done. Okay. Fixed. Thank you, chat. Thank you for helping out. Saved. Okay. So let's, I did get a haircut. So let's talk about, yeah, what are we doing today, chat? How y'all doing? So a couple of quick announcements. So we're going to be, today's Wednesday, right? So we're going to be regular stream schedule for the rest of the week. We'll probably be streaming on Friday. I don't imagine we'll do another gaming stream. So we've got some really good posts, and I'm going to do a quick lecture today. So our topics for today include how to set boundaries. So we're going to go over some like super basic but really important information about boundary setting. We're going to talk a little bit. There was a really interesting post about men who are desperately lonely on our subreddit. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And there's also a really great post about someone who has successfully optimized their life. They've put their life together, and there are parts of it that now suck because they're no longer a degen gamer. So we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to take a look at, what progress and growth can look like in this community. And also, paradoxically, some of the price that we pay for like growing as people and developing to be like healthy gamers. So those are the three posts we're going to cover today. We still have group coaching spots available. So if y'all are interested in group, these are actually good places to work on all this stuff, especially for some of the people who, I think some of the stuff we're going to be talking about sort of being desperate, being alone, craving a relationship. How do you manage some of those feelings? What are some of the steps that you can take to develop compassion towards yourself, learn how to be available to other people? Like some of those things are things that you can absolutely learn in group coaching, as well as navigating the balance of, first of all, setting goals for yourself, achieving those goals, and then sort of recognizing that growth in life comes at a price. These are also things that when I've run groups in the past, we've sort of talked about the price we pay for putting our lives together. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but like sometimes when we think about getting out of a situation, we don't really acknowledge or realize that growing as a person comes with like a pretty bad price to pay. And so how do you go about, and if that price sort of catches you, if you're not aware of what putting your life together is actually going to look like for you and feel like for you, you could stumble a little bit. So these are all things that if y'all are kind of interested in that sort of stuff, by all means, check out groups. We've seen a lot of good growth and progress. Hopefully we'll be publishing a paper in the next couple of months about this kind of stuff. So, we have to undergo the process of peer review and all that kind of thing. So we're sort of undergoing that process now. So hopefully we'll then be able to, make very scientifically validated third-party sort of approved statements about the impact of group coaching and personal coaching. Yeah, so as Chikan-san says, a caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly without becoming a pile of mush. That, unfortunately, is true for humans as well. Okay? So, yeah. Morning chat. So should we get started? What am I looking for? Okay. Oh, we're going to start with boundary setting, right? Okay. So let's talk about boundaries. Not necessarily true. Okay. I'm not an expert in entomology. Is that right? The study of bugs is entomology, right? Etymology is the study of word origins. Well, Mrs. Fitzhus, if you are terrible at setting boundaries, I hope we will be able to help. So let's talk about setting boundaries. So the tricky thing is that everyone sort of says, hey, like it's really important to set good boundaries, man. So I remember when I was in residency, the residency program director at the time, I was kind of asking her, you know, what's one of the most useful things that you've learned that you wish you knew earlier? And she was like, the most useful skill I ever learned was learning how to say no. And so, you know, you hear things like this, right? That learning to say no is important. It's important to like set healthy boundaries, like set healthy boundaries around technology and set healthy boundaries with your parents and set healthy boundaries with your friends and set healthy boundaries with your significant other. Just like set healthy boundaries, man or woman. But like no one ever teaches you like how do you set a boundary? Like how does that actually happen? So today what we're going to talk about is like share with y'all 5 important steps to setting a healthy boundary. The first is actually articulating the boundary. The second is how to implement the boundary. The third is common pitfalls, and this is something that I think is like grossly undereducated. Because setting a boundary is not easy, right? Like actually maintaining it is not just about the other person. It is oftentimes about you. So yeah, I promise I will, you know, I'm going to break up with this person and I'm never going to see them again. I'm going to go no contact with them. And let me text them 2 weeks from now when I'm feeling lonely on a Friday night, right? So what are some of the pitfalls to setting boundaries? And then like some in the moment tips with enforcing boundaries. So we can sort of say, okay, here's how you articulate a boundary. Here are the steps to implement it. Here are some things that you watch out for. But in the moment, when push comes to shove and you have to set a boundary with someone, it can be very, very hard, right? Because you're afraid of particular things. So what is the right way to, in the moment, like lay out a boundary with someone, enforce a boundary? And the last thing that I think, once again, is not talked about is after you lay a boundary with someone, after you enforce a boundary, what do you do then, right? So like a big risk around boundary setting is that if you have friends or parents or you know, significant others and you set a boundary with them, there's oftentimes like consequences to setting that boundary, right? So how do you manage those consequences? Because it's the fear of those consequences that oftentimes keeps us from setting the boundary in the first place or enforcing the boundary. I don't like it when my friends make fun of me, but if I say something to them, they're just going to make fun of me more. Or if I say something to them, they're going to think that I'm not fun to hang around with and I may not get invited next time, right? So like when you set boundaries with people, sometimes there are consequences. And so one of the things that I found is like a really, really undertaught skill is not just how to set a boundary, but after you set a boundary, how do you interact with the person to try to smooth things over and maintain a healthy relationship or hopefully repair whatever small rupture you have, okay? So let's dive in. So step number 1. So at the end of this, hopefully what you will be able to do is set a boundary, like articulate a boundary, implement a boundary, troubleshoot some of the pitfalls, get some like kind of coaching on in the moment what you should say or do when like push comes to shove and you really want to, you know, waver on your boundary. And then the last thing that I think is really important is like at the end of this, hopefully you'll have an idea of, okay, after I set a boundary and I feel guilty and like I'm afraid that people don't like me, how do I interact with that person afterward to kind of patch things up and make sure that things are okay? Okay? So step number 1 of boundary setting is articulating your boundary. So this is where we basically figure out, okay, what specifically is our boundary? And this is a thing that I think is like you got to be careful about, because if you want someone to adhere or respect a particular boundary, it has to be like clearly laid out. And the first problem that people run into is that they don't oftentimes like clearly articulate what the boundary is. And so if I sort of say like, I want you to stop treating me this way, it's like, how does that person know what this way is? Right? So like you're kind of setting them up to fail. I don't like it when you talk to me like this. So I'm not saying that those feelings aren't valid and they're absolutely there for a reason. But if we're thinking about a relationship, you need to be able to articulate it so that the other person understands what you mean. Okay? So we're going to start by articulating boundaries. Second thing that we're going to do is how to implement boundaries. Third thing we're going to do is pitfalls. So what are some of the traps or things that you have to watch out for when it comes to boundary setting? Number 4 is in the moment tips. Right? When you are setting a boundary with your friend and they aggro and the boss music starts to play, what do you do in that moment, right? How do you manage the aggro of your friend? And then last thing is, after the encounter is over, how do you repair the relationship? So aftermath of boundary setting. Okay? So let's start with number 1, articulating a boundary. So the first thing that I'd say is, if you're trying to set boundaries with people, okay, there are a couple of key tips to understand. The first is, the earlier in the relationship, the easier it is. Okay, this is first thing to understand. Number 2, it's easier to loosen a boundary than it is to tighten it. So this is part of the problem with so people who are dealing with, let's say, entitled parents, narcissistic parents, entitled family members. If you haven't set a boundary with them, any kind of tightening that you do on the boundary is going to be met with a ton of resistance, right? Whereas if you're starting a relationship with someone, you can sort of lay out what your boundaries are early on. But if there's an expectation of behavior already in place, running contrary to that expectation is going to encounter more resistance, okay? So what we want to do, first of all, is make the boundary very clear. So this should be actions that you articulate. So I'll kind of give you all an example. So let's say that you're talking to your parents and your parents have forbidden you to date because you are an Asian or South Asian person, or many other cultures, I suppose. So no dating in middle school, certainly not. That's absurd. No dating in high school, no, that's not something that our people do. And in college, you should be focusing on studies. And then something happens where your 25th birthday rolls around, and then depending on your gender, you may get a little bit of leeway one way or the other. 25th birthday rolls around, 26th birthday rolls around. Now it's okay, now it's time to get married. Why aren't you? And then 27th birthday rolls around. Why aren't you married yet? 28th birthday rolls around. And it's what's wrong with you? Everyone else is getting married. It would calm me down so much if you could just get married. Don't you understand how much I worry about you and what's going to happen about your future? And now it's time, beta. Now it's time. Now it's time, beta. It's time. It's time. It's time. Oh my goodness, it's time. So when you're sort of dealing with this, the first thing that you have to do is clearly articulate what the boundary is. So you have to figure out, okay, because remember, this is a behavior that you want someone else to do. So the boundary should be behavioral in nature. It can't be some kind of emotion that you want them to prevent. You don't want them to evoke an emotion. That's not a boundary you can set. They can't control how they make you feel. They can only control what they say. So you want your boundary to be very, very clear and very behavioral in nature. So for example, for this person, what I would recommend is, when we talk on the phone, don't ask about personal or romantic relationships. right? So like, it doesn't mean it just, this is the thing. Like when we talk on the phone, right? So I'm assuming a couple things that, you know, you don't live with your parents or they're not physically there with you or things like that. And you can kind of say like, hey, like every time we talk on the phone, like you keep on hammering me with the same stuff, right? You're always asking me when I'm going to get married. I'll tell you when I have information. Going forward, I would appreciate it if you did not ask me about this. Okay? This is where you kind of want to like be very, very clear about an ask. Now, for people who have like very, very pushy parents or very loose boundaries or things like that, the other thing is remember that it's easier to loosen than it is to tighten. So if we are implementing boundaries for people, like, remember this is an over time process. So what you want to do, it's longitudinal in nature. So what you want to do is like, you can't fix everything all at once. And it's hard to ask people to make drastic adjustments overnight. So what we're going to do is start by implementing a tiny, tiny boundary, right? So this is where we are. This is where we want to go. We're not going to go like from here to here in one step. We're going to go right here, which they can manage. And then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and then we may take a bigger step, right? But generally speaking, we want to tighten our boundaries very, very gradually, much like the way that I tighten my belt over my dad gut, right? So what we want to do is like be very, very clear with a behavioral instruction, okay? Second thing that we want to do is provide a very simple reason. This is important. We do not want to provide complex reasons. We do not want to provide like intense reasons. We do not want to provide justifications, logic. We do not want to provide scientific fact. We do not want to talk to them about how they make us feel when they do that. We want to provide a very, very simple reason. Ideally, one sentence of a reason. So here's why. When you provide complex reasons, I don't want to go out with you because I'm not looking for a relationship. Okay, that's option number one versus I don't date gamers. I'm not looking for a relationship. I'm celibate right now. I have problems with my health. The more reasons you provide, the more justifications you provide, the more argument you will invite. So this is something that people like, this is a very important thing to understand. When you lay a boundary with someone, it's not a discussion. The more ammo, and this is what one of the key drivers, okay? So when we lay out a boundary with someone, we want them to understand. Because if they understand, they won't push us. The more they understand about me, the more they understand about me, the more they understand about me, the easier it will be, the less friction there will be, the more they will see my perspective and the more they will respect me, and then there won't be conflict. So what we tend to do is provide reasons to try to buy ourselves peace. But in fact, what it does is the exact opposite. The more reasons we provide, the more argument the more logic, more reasons and more stuff we sort of say to them, it invites discussion, right? So what we want to do is ideally a very simple reason. And like, it can be like super simple, right? So it's something that you want to keep like not, you don't want to justify in a way that sort of like invites argument or things like that. If they really want to ask, maybe you can answer a little bit more, but generally speaking, you can say, hey, when we talk on the phone, I'd appreciate it. Like, I don't find it helpful. In fact, it like makes it really hard for me to even think about this stuff. And it makes me not want to engage with you when you ask me about my romantic relationships. Going forward, when we talk on the phone, I'd appreciate it if you didn't ask me about that. Okay? So you want to make it just very, very clear. But metta, and that's where you listen to them. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here. But generally speaking, what we want to do when we articulate a boundary is make a clear behavioral thing, an action that they can follow, right? As well as like sort of circumstances in which the boundary is like taking place. So we want to think about when, where, and what in terms of our boundary setting, right? When are we going to enforce this? No playing video games after 10 p.m. on weekdays. And it's not, oh, I'm so worried about your future. I'm so worried you're going to do this. And, oh, so-and-so's son is doing this. And all you ever do is play video games. Don't you understand? I love you so much. Oh, my God, like, I'm so worried about what's going to happen. You don't understand because you're so young. None of that crap. If you're a parent, unfortunately, I hate to break this to y'all, Twitch, but we teach this to your parents too, and it works wonders. You lay a boundary with people. It's like clearly articulated. So no games after 10 p.m., period. Why? Because it's important that you focus on your school. But I do focus on my school. Cool. This is where with parents and stuff, we'll sort of say like, you need to maintain a particular GPA. Then we can talk about games on weekdays after 10 p.m. Okay? So very, very simple. You're right. It's difficult, Jake. Well, we're going to help you through that. That's where some of the pitfalls come in. So you want to provide a very simple reason. You want to make it nice and clear. Okay? Now, this is how you define or articulate your boundary. Now we're going to move on to implementing a boundary. Okay, some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is absolutely OP. Critical mistakes that people make and how to avoid them, okay? First thing is that you lay the boundary without enforcing it at the same time. This is important. This is where a lot of people make the simplest mistake of boundaries. If I'm limiting my child's gaming, I am not going to tell them at 10 p.m. for the first time that I'm limiting their gaming after 10. I'm going to tell them at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday or 2 p.m. on a Saturday, hey, come this Monday, starting this Monday, after 10 p.m., no more games. So you don't want to lay the boundary, or you don't want to like explain to someone what the boundary is when you are emotional, right? And like when it's an active issue. Because what's going to happen is they're going to dismiss your concern. Because you're going to be like, they're going to be pissed, right? They're going to dismiss your concern. Because like you're active like then and there. People don't like they don't like laying out a boundary while it's being enforced. So the way that I want you to think about it is like, getting arrested for something that is breaking the law is very different from getting punished for something that you were not aware of. So if someone walks up to you and they're like, that's against the rules, I'm going to take your backpack away. You're like, wait, what? Like, I didn't know that was against the rules. No one ever explained that to me. Like, I was not aware of this. So in that same way, we want to give people a chance ahead of time to understand what the boundary is. Because the other important thing is that if your parents are asking you, for example, about your romantic life, they want to know in that moment. So it is going to feel really, really punitive, and it's going to cost them something additional if you lay a boundary and enforce it. So we want to separate those two things out. We want people to have a lot of advance notice about the boundary before we enforce it. That way, when we enforce it, it's kind of tricky. I don't know if this sort of makes sense, but if you lay a boundary and enforce it at the same time, you're going to get a lot more pushback because they want to know in that moment what's going on in your romantic life, right? That curiosity or that desire or that anxiety is there. It's going to be hard for them to respect it. But when y'all are like, let's say you're going out with your parents for grocery shopping at noon on a Saturday, and y'all are going out grocery shopping, and you're saying, hey, like while you're in the car, you kind of say, hey, like there's something I wanted to let y'all know. I know that you guys are concerned, we'll talk about this as well, about my romantic situation and things like that. I appreciate your concern. I just want to let y'all know that whenever you ask me on the phone, it really makes me like very upset and not want to talk to you. So going forward, I'm not going to really participate in any conversations about my romantic life on the phone. So you want to give them advance notice. This is key. Okay? That's going to make it easier for them to digest. Remember, laying the boundary and enforcing the boundary is going from here to here at the same time. This is the conversation 2 days before, right? And then enforcement is going to be this. Don't worry, we'll get here. We're just going to do it slow. Okay? So step number one, tip number one, lay the boundary and enforce the boundary separately. Give them advance notice. Okay? Tip number two for implementing a boundary, acknowledge their perspective. Once again, we're having this conversation ahead of time, right? So you're not pissed off in this moment, but you want to acknowledge their perspective. They will be much more likely to adhere to your boundaries if you acknowledge their perspective. That does not mean that you necessarily agree with it or that you have to cede to it, but you want to demonstrate to them, because when you lay a boundary with someone, you want to demonstrate to them that you understand. So when you lay a boundary with someone, here's me. Here's the boundary. Here's the person I have a relationship with. One of the most common counter arguments is they don't understand. Oh, beta, you don't understand. You are getting old now. You don't understand. It's going to be hard. Things have to be done in their own time. Right? Like, oh, you don't understand. So what you want to do is you want to sort of deflate that by expressing your understanding ahead of time. And since it's not an argument, since they have nothing to lose, they're not going to like argue with you there. Right? So what you want to do is ahead of time, acknowledge their perspective. So you can say, hey, I understand that, things should be done in a particular time. And that now that I'm 28, you feel like it's really important that I get married. Can you help me understand a little bit about why it's so important to be married at 28 as opposed to 26 or 30? Like what changes? So you can ask a question or two, right? So we're going to use some good old HG conversational techniques. Okay. You can learn this from watching what we do on stream and how we ask questions. As you can also these are things that we explicitly teach in group coaching, right? So you can ask questions. And remember, this is not when you're enforcing a boundary, so it's a peaceful conversation. Oh, okay, I understand. So it's about kids. Yeah, I understand. So when I have my newborn pictures, it looks bad if I'm bald. Gotcha, Mom. I'm with you. There's kids, there's this, there's that, there's, things need to be done in their own time. Or if they can't give you a good answer, which I know is crazy, but is oftentimes going to happen. And they can't give you a concrete answer. They just think that it should be done at that time because that's culturally what they believe. So you can say, I'm not really hearing a clear reason, but it's clear to me that you feel very strongly about this and that it's very important to you. And then like when you say things like that, they can't say this. Okay? Oh, sorry, y'all can't see that. All right, so you acknowledge their perspective. That's going to be really important, okay? Next thing you can do is clarify their understanding. This also is going to reduce the tension when it comes to enforcement. So what does clarify their understanding mean? That means asking them what they understood about your boundary. So step number 1, we're going to say, when we talk on the phone, I don't want you to ask about personal or romantic relationships. Can you help me understand why it's so important I get married now? Then what you're going to do is say, okay, so I just want to make sure we're on the same page. What did you understand about what I want to talk about on the phone and what I want to avoid talking about on the phone? So you want to ask them, just make sure we're on the same page. So just like, what did you understand? Or like, what are my preferences about what's off limits on the phone? And then they'll say like, okay, you don't want to talk about marriage. Okay. Okay, great. Cool. Okay. Then what you want to do is offer them anticipatory consequences. Just so you know, Mom, I'm so glad that you understood and heard me that I don't want to talk about marriage every time we talk on the phone. That really means a lot to me. If in the future you decide to ask me, just understand that I'm going to go ahead and like politely hang up. I'm not going to like hang up on you, but I'll sort of let you know, hey, Mom, I'll remind you, I'll say, hey, remember when I said I don't want to talk on the phone? And then like, I'm just going to step away from the conversation, right? So you want to let people know what the consequences are. So, hey, son, it's Saturday at noon. Starting this week at 10 p.m., no gaming after weekdays until you have a 3.5 GPA. Okay? And then they're kind of like, okay, whatever, because they're not playing then, right? It's like you're not enforcing a limit. So you're not going to encounter game rage. By the way, if you're playing after 10 p.m., no games for the next 48 hours or no games for the rest of the week, just so you understand. Okay, you didn't understand. Okay, what are we starting next week? I did things kind of out of order. What's the rule we're starting? What did you understand about what I said? Okay, no games after 10 p.m. Okay, cool. I'm glad we're on the same page. By the way, if you do play games after 10 p.m., you're going to, on a weekday, if you end up doing that, I'm going to go ahead and take away the game for the rest of the week. Okay, so you want to lay out anticipatory like consequences ahead of time. So once again, the goal here is to lay this stuff out outside of the conflict. Okay? No games for 24 hours, no games for the rest of the week. You can do whatever anticipatory consequences you want, right? Especially if you're a parent. So this is really, really important. Implementing a boundary. Let's kind of recap. So once we've articulated it, that's not enough. There are all these important elements to implementing the boundary that we have articulated. We've figured out the what, when, how, right? Where. We figured out we don't want to get into a bunch of reasoning, but we also want a couple of these steps when laying out the boundary. The first is that we don't want to lay it while we're enforcing it. We need to separate that emotion and conflict from enforcement from the kind of intellectual discussion and notifying people, right? It's sort of like when you get these notifications, by the way, your bill is due on the 30th. By the way, your bill is 7 days past due. By the way, in 2 weeks, if we don't hear from you, we're going to send you to collections. This is very, very effective in terms of behaviorally sort of letting people know what the consequences are to get them to comply with particular behavior. So we want to lay out the boundary ahead of time when no one is emotionally active. Second thing is we want to acknowledge their perspective, right? So we want to say I understand that you have feelings, you have goals. I respect those goals. It's just I can't do this on the phone. We can talk about it in person. That's fine. But I just can't do it on the phone. Clarify their understanding. You want to make sure that it's actually sinking in. Because for a lot of people, when you lay a boundary, like it's going to kind of go in one ear and out the other. So you want to clarify their understanding. What did you understand about this? If they don't understand, you can say it again. You can repeat it, and then you can ask them right away. It's going to kind of feel like sort of artificial or maybe even make them feel stupid, but that's okay, right? So you just want to, hey, I understand. I know it's weird that I'm sort of asking you to like again and again, but like I just want to make sure that I'm communicating clearly. You can just say something like that, okay? This is important to me. And then you want to offer anticipatory consequences. So, hey, if you do this, this is what I'm going to do. So get ready for it because you're probably going to do it. Okay? That's how you implement. Now, as you go to implement a boundary, what will happen is you will screw it up. Right? Because this is hard. And even you can sort of say, I'd love to implement this boundary, but this is where, like, as a human being, you have all kind of thoughts, goals, emotions, relationships, ego. You have all this crap floating around in your head. And that's not all aligned, right? Oh, I want to study, but damn, do I really want to play Elden Ring? I really, really don't want I don't want my mom to ask me about marriage, but internally I'm terrified. And when I hear her speak the terror that is in my heart, it feels like emotionally satisfying in a bizarre way. It's kind of like when I'm doom scrolling after I get dumped and I'm stalking my ex on social media. Does it feel bad? Yeah. Is it addictive? Hell yeah. Right? So there are weird internal things that are going on in our body, in our mind, that cause us to screw up the boundaries that we try to set. So pitfall number 1, okay? We kind of talked about this, but avoid lengthy explanations. So oftentimes, when it comes to enforcing a boundary, we want to have long conversations about it. We want to justify, hey, I'm not crazy that I'm doing this. Like, here are all the reasons why. Like, please try to understand this is hurtful for me and pay attention to me and understand me. So don't be mad. Don't be mad at me. This is a powerful emotional driver when you lay a boundary with someone. This emotional driver is the single biggest driver to why people screw up their boundaries. Because they don't want people to be mad at them. Okay? So just avoid the lengthy explanations, avoid justifications. Why is this? Shouldn't you explain yourself? It's kind of like simple behavioral stuff where oftentimes if you look at if you take 100 people who provide lengthy explanations and justifications, and people who don't provide lengthy explanations and justifications. People who don't provide lengthy explanations and justifications are just more successful at setting boundaries and having other people adhere to them. So you want to be like simple, because once you have a 2-hour conversation about feelings, like what was that simply articulated thing that you were supposed to do? Like, I don't even remember, because now we had this deep heart to heart where like we understand each other so much better now. Sometimes that can be useful. We'll talk about when and how to have that heart to heart. Those are important, but you don't want to, you want to avoid lengthy explanations, especially at the time of enforcement. In enforcement, it's about behavior, not explanation or justification. Okay. Next up. Okay, so next up is, oh yeah, this is huge. Prepare for the consequences. Okay? So now this is really tricky, but when you set a boundary with someone, there are going to be consequences for you too. Right? This is something that you really, really need to understand. So oftentimes the reason that we don't succeed in laying out boundaries is because we don't really like prepare for the consequences. And the consequences are so emotionally painful that we end up giving up on our boundary. And this has a devastating effect. So when I lay a boundary and I don't enforce it, what am I entraining the other person to do? What is the lesson they are learning? Think about this for a second. Yep, very good. My boundaries can be safely ignored. What you are actually training this person to do is disrespect your boundaries. It's the exact opposite. So don't lay a boundary unless you are prepared to deal with the consequences. This is part of the other thing that's very important about how we set boundaries. This is why we don't want to go here, because the consequences for this are large. The consequences for this are usually small. And essentially what we want to do is we want people to understand that once I lay a boundary, this is the hill I'm going to die on. And this is where you just want to make the consequences like relatively small for them. So even in this situation, you know, having been, this is close to home, but when, you know, parents are like, oh, beta, when are you going to get married? We're not saying you can't ever ask me about marriage. That's too difficult for your parents to handle. So it's just when we talk on the phone and when we go get groceries, when we go out to eat, you can bombard me. You don't want to say that, but you want to give them a place to bombard you. And then eventually what we're going to do is tighten that boundary, right? So you can say like, hey, I understand that this is important to y'all. I really appreciate that we're not talking about it on the phone. Can we go out to dinner? Like when we go out to dinner, I just want to enjoy spending time with you. I don't want to think about this stuff. I understand you're worried. We can like talk about it like once a month. Like I'll come over on a weekend and we can just have one discussion about it. I'm not saying that I want to shut you down completely, but when we go out to dinner, I don't want to talk about this at all. Okay? So you have to be prepared for the consequences. First of all, they could be emotionally painful. Second thing to really think about is that people may treat you differently. Right? So you may not get invited to that party. Your friends may not ask you to queue up with them if you lay a boundary. It's possible. So you have to mentally be prepared for that. And the main thing here is that you have to really anticipate the consequence so that you know it's coming. And if you know it's coming, much like this, if you have anticipatory consequences, you yourself will be able to handle it emotionally better. So this is just like a general aspect of human psychology where if human beings know something is coming, they're better able to deal with it. It is the expectation of no boundary followed by the arbitrary setting of a boundary that is infuriating to deal with. And if y'all have had controlling parents, you know exactly what I mean here. Where there are some people that like, it's like you just suddenly get 15 phone calls between 9:15 and 9:45, where your parents are like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Why aren't you home yet? Why aren't you answering your phone? The reason you have a phone is to answer our calls. And you're like, where on earth is this coming from? And they're like, you know you're supposed to be home by 9. And you're like, what are you talking about? We've never had this conversation before. It's infuriating. Or the parent who comes into your room and is like, why aren't you going to bed yet? You have school tomorrow. Unplug that video game right now. If you don't unplug, I'm going to throw away your computer. You see this hammer? I'm going to smash your PlayStation. And it's like, there's no anticipation. Whereas if someone kind of tells you, hey, by the way, this is going to happen at this time. We're going to shut off the internet. Right? That's dad, by the way, not mom. Come on. Heteronormative chat. Right? So prepare for the consequences. Understand that, like, emotionally it could be painful. Maybe I'll be a little bit lonely. Maybe my parents will guilt trip me. Oh, beta, don't you understand? Your mother worries so much, beta. Arey Bhagwan. Do you want to be a good son? Then let me tell you how you need to get married 4 years ago. Do you want to be a good son? Arey, think about your ba. Your grandmother is in India and she is stressed so much. She has diabetes and her blood sugar is bad because you have not gotten married. Think about your ba. The guilt trip may happen, right? So be prepared for it. And it could be little things, right? So if you set a boundary with your gaming friends, they may like invite you less, or like they may like be DMing you behind your back or other kinds of petty crap. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay? So you got to think about consequences, right? So prepare for them. Understand that it's going to be tough. The good news, a little reassurance here, is that human beings tend to be creatures of habit. And if you set a small boundary with someone, chances are they're not going to rupture the entire relationship. And this is where, like, if they're going to rupture the entire relationship because you set a small boundary with them, that's something you need to understand, because this is not a relationship you can, like, win in, right? When they're willing to go nuclear every time you, like, try to lay a boundary with them about taking out the trash, like, this is not a healthy relationship that you can win. Like, because, a healthy relationship requires two people to be contributing. Okay? Third thing is be aware, we sort of talked about this a little bit, but be aware of the emotional drivers to compromising your boundaries. So number one reason that you give up on your boundaries, it's not even the other person. You give up on your boundaries is because of some kind of usual emotional driver. So, like, what is your weakness? What do you have low amounts of resistance to? Do you have guilt resistance? Do you have, what if they don't like me? What if you have, let me think about this, loneliness vulnerability? I would rather be bullied than be alone. Right? So, and this is where you've got to do some work, because, like, this is important. Because what you don't want to do is set a hypothetical boundary that you wish were true and that you wish you could enforce if you can't enforce it. So you need to think about this first. And you have to really think about, what am I willing to actually enforce? And that's the boundary that you should set. Okay? And, like, because otherwise what you're actually doing, if you optimistically set a boundary, it's like, I'm going to a wedding and let me get my tux or my dress or whatever tailored to be like 2 sizes too small, because that's going to be motivation for me to, like, lose weight, because now I'm locked in. Don't do that kind of crap. You're just going to end up looking bad, being uncomfortable. Some people will succeed. It works for some people. But when it comes to boundaries, like, don't do that. Set boundaries that you can enforce. Because if you can win this one, then you can win this one, and then you can win this one, and then you can win this one, and then you can win this one. This is what you want to do. Okay? Gradual. So think a little bit about, okay, how am I going to feel? And when I feel that way, what am I going to want to do? Okay, I broke up with this person. I'm going to block them, and be prepared for the feeling of loneliness that hits 2 weeks out, because we're on again, off again. This has been going on for 3 years. We've broken up 6 times. So when you sort of do that, be prepared for that and be like, okay, so, like, am I going to be able to resist in 2 weeks? Well, I need to resist. That's not the question. Are you going to be able to? What can you do to help you resist? Okay, so, like, it sounds like every Friday night when the loneliness hits, like, I'm going to start playing Lost Ark and we're going to schedule raids. So I'm going to be, like, busy during those times. or I'm going to turn off my phone and I'm going to put it in a different room and I'm going to like watch movies or whatever. So you have to think about your own emotional drivers and kind of work on those. Okay? Now, when it comes to in the moment, so now we've sort of thought through your emotional drivers. We've thought about the consequences of laying a boundary. You've articulated things. You've sort of, given them anticipatory consequences, and you lay a boundary. So how do you actually, in the moment, tell someone that you are enforcing a boundary? Like, what do you say, like, in that moment, right? So this is also something that I don't see this anywhere. I even did a Google search for like boundary setting in preparation for this, and I just saw like all this generic crap about like learn to say no. Like, okay, how? Like, why can't people say no? Like, there's no. So this is detailed, okay? So first thing is you state the boundary. Like, state it, like literally. Hey, mom, you remember when we talked about how like we're not supposed to? You agreed not to. Ask me about like marriage stuff over the phone. I asked you to not ask me about that, and you are asking me about that now. Okay? So this is the key thing. If you can, you want to remind people of the prior conversation. Right? So you can kind of, this is like very short. This is like 5 seconds. This is 5 seconds. These are not long conversations. Mom, do you remember when we talked about how you're not supposed to ask me about marriage? Okay? And then don't get bogged down in justification. If they're like, no, I don't remember. Or because they're trying to engage you with discussion. No, but like things have changed. Like that was different. I didn't realize you were talking about this. I didn't know. I forgot. No, it's really important. Like, this is different. Like, people are going to respond to you with some kind of, like, engagement with conversation. Okay? So they will try to engage with you. Either they will dispute the conversation. In bad scenarios, they may try to gaslight you. But I think that word gets thrown around a lot. Chances are they'll justify their actions. So be prepared for justifications, disputes, arguments, all that kind of stuff. So we don't want to get into that. No explanations. They can say, you just want to listen to what they're going to say. And then you can say, okay, you can acknowledge if you want to here. Okay, I understand that you think that this scenario is different. And then what you want to do is consequence. So you're going to say, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You can say, okay, good. I'm glad you're sorry. It seems like you understand. I'm still going to step away from the conversation. This is critical. Okay? I want y'all to understand this. No games after 10 p.m. 11 p.m. rolls around and someone is playing games. Remind of the boundary. Kid says, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. Critical juncture. What does the parent do now? What does the parent do now? No games this week. You enforce the consequence. Mom, I'm so glad you understand. I'm going to go ahead and hang up. No. But I said I'm sorry. Good. I'm really glad you understand that, you made a mistake. That means a lot to me. Bye. I'll give you a call tomorrow. Right? So you want to kind of acknowledge their perspective. If they did apologize, great. I'm glad you understand. Enforce. Okay? This is how people get manipulated. So if you're vulnerable to manipulation, what tends to happen is you lay a boundary. They say, I'm sorry. You don't enforce. And what are you teaching the person? That I'm sorry is a substitute for respecting my boundaries. This is literally what you are behaviorally training the person to do. You're teaching them, just apologize and you can continue violating my boundaries. I'm so glad that you feel bad about taking advantage of me. and turning me into a doormat. Let me lay down on the floor so that you can walk all over me. Just make sure you apologize as you're doing that, because then everything will be okay. Okay? This is important. So once the boundary is crossed, the boundary is crossed. You can acknowledge it, but it's enforced. Okay? I'm glad you understand. So hopefully next time this happens, like, next time we talk on the phone, I really hope that you remember this. Goodbye. Now, last thing, but does this mean that everyone will hate me? The aftermath of boundary setting. Okay? So, first thing to understand is that relationships must grow. Your relationship cannot stay static over time. It is just not the nature of relationships. So if we think about friendship, if we think about marriage, if we think about, the parent-child relationship, right? So my relationship with my parents when I'm 2 is different from what it is when I'm 10, is different from what it is when I'm 20, and is different from what it is when I'm 30 and 35. Right? Like that is a natural part of things. My marriage was, when I first started dating my girlfriend, our relationship was one thing. Then we were officially dating. Then we became engaged. Then we got married. Then we were like married prior to kids. And then we're married with kids. And these are all different things. Like the relationship must change over time. Relationships have to grow just like human beings do. Nothing is static. So, what the key thing to understand about boundary setting is that a lot of times we feel guilty for ruining the relationship, whereas like it's okay to feel guilty, right? Maybe you are ruining an aspect of the relationship. I know it sounds weird to say, but sometimes aspects of relationships need to be ruined in order for the relationship to grow. You can't just keep doing things the way that you used to as relationships change. So what you can always do, once again, this is separate from the enforcement. So there's enforcement conversation. And then 24 to 96 hours later, there's a feedback conversation. So this is where you should actively reach out to the person and say, so give your mom a call the next day and say, hey mom, how are you? What did you think? I know I stepped off the phone yesterday. What was that like for you? So just ask them for feedback. What was that like for you? Okay. I'm glad we're talking. Are you okay with what I did, or did you feel hurt? Can you tell me a little bit about that? You don't have to change your boundary, but you can ask to understand their perspective, because this is where sometimes people get on this boundary setting high, where they start just laying boundaries. Man, people don't respect my boundaries. If they don't respect me, I'm not going to respect them. And that's how you turn into an asshole in a relationship. So it's important to lay boundaries. And it's also important to understand that some of your boundaries may be, I know it's shocking, oh my goodness, some of your boundaries may be unreasonable, right? It's I don't want to talk about the dishes. When it's bro, we're roommates and you don't do your fucking dishes. I understand that it makes you upset, but are you going to do the dishes? Right? So there's a different person involved in this relationship. So you have to engage with that person in the aftermath if you want to develop a healthy relationship. So you have to ask them, hey, what was that like for you? Okay? Ask for feedback. So next thing to understand is that remember that boundary setting is one step at a time. So this is something that you can gradually do over time, but generally speaking, you want to maintain the relationship with them by asking for feedback. By the way, asking for feedback is also, actually, let me move this around a little bit. So before we do this one, actually, what we're going to do is express feedback. So ask for feedback first and then express feedback. So this is where you can even express gratitude. Huge for repairing the relationship. Hey, mom, I know that I set a limit yesterday on our conversation. I'm really, really glad and happy that you didn't call me immediately afterward and that you answered my phone today. I imagine that you must be, or since you've already asked them, I know that you're feeling upset about that. And I'm really grateful that you're choosing to respect my boundary here. It means a lot to me. It makes it so much easier for me to call you. And I really hope that we can talk about this, because I was noticing that because you keep asking about this, I felt like I didn't even want to talk to you. I stopped answering your calls, and that's not the kind of relationship I want with you. So thank you so much for respecting my boundary. It's hard for people to be pissed at you when you say things like that, right? And if they're still going to be pissed at you, they're like, screw you. And then like, that's someone that you may not, like, that's like a toxic person that you may want to be super careful about letting into your life, right? So you may want to set limits with them. Whereas if they're reasonable people who are willing for their relationship to grow, like, this is all going to be good stuff. So oddly enough, after you enforce a boundary, expressing gratitude is a huge way to patch things up. Okay? And then last thing is process your emotions. Huge. Externally. Huge, huge, huge. So all this crap is going to leave you with emotions. This is going to be the result of emotions. These kinds of like justifications and things like that, right? Like all these complex reasons that we give people are due to our own emotions. Expressing gratitude is going to be really, really hard towards your parents if you are still pissed at them for bringing it up. I told you I didn't want you to do it. And you did it anyway. And I feel so hurt, which is fine that you feel that way, but you don't want to bring that up with them. So here's the key thing about like setting a boundary. In summary, you want to be calm, cool, collected when setting, when enforcing, and when doing debriefing afterwards. Because if you get messed up in the head, like everything is going to get way harder. Okay? Because you want to keep it like nice and clean. Like we want boundaries to be clean, clean, clean. So in order for you to be calm, cool, and collected, you need to take your emotions somewhere else. Vent to a third party. Talk to a friend on Discord. Talk to a therapist. Go to your group. And talk to your group about, hey, I'm working, let's all set boundaries. Like, let's work on boundaries together. Okay, this is what we're going to do this week in group. Pick a person, set a boundary. Let's all articulate the boundary ahead of time. Okay, what's your boundary? What's my boundary? Okay, that sounds too complicated. That sounds like it's not going to work well. Okay, what are the anticipated problems that you're going to feel emotionally when you try to set a boundary? What are the consequences that you can expect? We're going to think through all these things together so that we're prepared for them. Okay, let's go do our homework. Lay that boundary. Don't enforce it. Have a conversation ahead of time. Go do this thing. Okay? And then like when you come in the next week in group, like it's going to be a mess, right? Because everyone will have screwed up because this is a skill just like anything else. And then when everyone in group sort of struggles with it, then you guys are going to work, y'all are going to work together and hopefully like process your emotions and then you're going to try it again. Okay? So, to summarize, issue number 1, healthy boundaries are important. Yet, no one teaches us how to set boundaries. Setting boundaries is a lot more than telling people what you want them to do. If you want to successfully set a boundary, you have to make it easy for them to manage. How do you make it easy for them to manage? You articulate it clearly, number 1. You don't provide a whole lot of reasons, justifications, complexity, because that just invites argument and it invites discussion, and then we lose sight of the boundary. Second thing to understand is once we have an articulated boundary, we want to really separate out when we inform people of the boundary and when we enforce the boundary. Boundary enforcement is filled with emotion, filled with people getting hurt, and filled with like people getting upset with each other. Because a big reason that we tend to forego our own boundaries is to maintain relationships. So we want to remove that emotion from the equation by setting the boundary ahead of time, letting people know. There are a lot of pitfalls we have to watch out for. Sometimes the biggest pitfall is ourselves. We don't want to feel guilty. We don't want to feel bad. We don't want to deal with the consequences. So we end up not enforcing the boundary, which in turn entrains the exact opposite behavior, which is you're just teaching people, hey, my boundaries don't need to be respected because I'm not going to do anything to you if you don't respect them. So you can just ignore what I say. Okay? There are lots of common pitfalls that we run into, engaging in arguments, stuff like that. Next thing is when it comes down to the actual enforcement of a boundary. State it clearly. These don't need to be long conversations. They don't want to be complicated kinds of things. We want to separate out enforcement from debriefing and aftermath of a boundary setting. So you just say, hey, remind people of the boundary, remind people of the conversation, acknowledge their perspective, enforce, and you get the hell out of the conversation as quickly as possible, right? So what you want people to experience is the behavioral consequence as opposed to like, you said this and I can't believe that you did this and oh, I feel so hurt and like, oh my God, blah, 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 blah. And then you guys like talk for an hour, you kind of patch things up. It feels great, right? Oh, you've like strengthened your relationship. I understand you so much better now. Oh my God, I understand you so much better now. And what happens next? Got to be careful. Sometimes that leads to positive behavioral change. Sometimes it does not. So by all means, have that conversation, but separate it out from the enforcement. So that conversation is important. That's where we get to the debrief. What should you do afterward? Talk to the person. Express gratitude. Try to understand their perspective. Maybe explain a little bit of your own. Right? Oh, I understand that you're sorry and you didn't realize that you were keeping track of time. Okay, so it sounds like, going forward, you're going to be able to keep better track of time. So starting next week, it shouldn't be a problem. But what about this week? I said I learned my lesson. Good, I'm really glad. So it shouldn't be a problem next week. But my friends are raiding tonight. Okay. What do you mean, okay? Does that mean I get to play? No. We talked about no games after 10 p.m. and you played till 11. And we discussed the consequence of no gaming this week. So you can raid with your friends next week, but I'm going to miss out on loot. Okay, well, you'll miss out on loot. And it's like, that's, they can say it. And this is where like, oh, loot isn't important. You got to think about what's important in life. Like, don't get distracted with all that crap, right? So you want to hear their perspective. Okay, I understand that raiding is important to you. It seems like this is a really important deal that you're missing out on raiding. I hadn't realized that. Now that you realize it, can I play? No. Right, so maybe you want to reconsider, but generally speaking, enforcement is enforcement. Then you ask for feedback. You can express gratitude. You can acknowledge what people have kind of done for you. And if you're pissed, like decompress those emotions elsewhere for now. Okay? And that's how we set boundaries. Questions? Kudos, this seems like a very rigid set of rules. Yeah, so it's rigid with y'all. The cool thing is that when you do it properly, is it going to feel rigid to other people? Yes, which is what we want to do. And you're not going to come across as crazy. You're going to come across as understanding, compassionate, and firm. That's what we want with boundary setting, right? I understand what you're saying. Okay, so like this is still going to be good. That's totally fine. Like, it is rigid. That's what people, we don't want to be doormats, right? And that's where like the more that you have conversations, the more that you understand their perspective, like there's going to be some rigidity because at some point you're saying no and you're putting up a wall between their actions and what you're allowing. That requires rigidity. The question is, how can we optimize that process for compliance on their part as well as maintaining the relationship? Someone's asking, I've never set boundaries with my friends or family. Should I do it? Do you need to? That's for you to figure out. This is a how, not whether you should. Because what I hear far too often is like, I need to learn how to set boundaries. I have terrible boundaries. We see this all the time. I have terrible boundaries. Okay, so like, what are we going to do about that? Right? Like everyone's like, oh my God, I have terrible boundaries. People don't respect my boundaries. Okay, like, what are we going to do about it? Like, how? Love yourself more. Like, just learn how to say no. Like, it doesn't work. Like, this is not just learn how to say no. This is like lots of steps. And there's a reason why we have all those steps. Each of these steps will mitigate the damage, mitigate the emotions, hopefully salvage the relationship as best as you can. The other thing is that when you do this kind of stuff, like, if people are reacting very, very badly to it, this is why we ask for feedback. And this is not like ask for feedback and ignore what they say, like really pay attention to them because you may be bad at setting boundaries. And if this is the other thing to understand is that sometimes you sort of need like a friend transplant, like a friend group transplant. Because if you're with a group of people who really does not like boundaries being set on them and you start enforcing boundaries, you may have to gravitate towards people who are like, will respect boundaries. And maybe your entire friend circle won't. So that can sometimes happen. Are boundaries ever worth being challenged, or is that toxic? Of course they're worth being challenged. Because who says that the boundary that you set is not toxic to begin with? Right? So I have a boundary that I'm never going to take out the trash. That's my boundary. I need you to respect that. It's like, that's not fair to me. Right? So this is a relationship has mutual elements. This is something that I see a lot, especially on the internet. If someone will frame a problem a particular way, like, oh, like so-and-so, like, they're not respecting, like you frame, because it's like you're biased, right? So you ask the internet for advice. And the internet is like, pitchforks, pitchforks, pitchforks. Screw that person. They're not respecting your boundaries. Where it's like, you know, the internet doesn't ask questions like, okay, like when they try to respect your boundaries, how do you sabotage them? Which happens a lot, right? We self-sabotage when it comes to boundaries. Like maybe you should work on that. A boundary is not, just because you set a boundary does not make it objectively correct. So be reflective. How to set a boundary with yourself to not make myself suffer? Coming up. Coolest Harold. So what if one part of us feels like setting boundaries isn't a good idea? That's completely normal. The reason that boundaries are so hard to set is because there's almost always a part of you that doesn't think it's a good idea. That's why they're so freaking hard to set. Like, why do you think it's so hard? It's not because of other people, it's because of you. Like, the reason we're bad at setting boundaries is because of our own emotional needs. I don't want people to dislike me. I don't want people to be mad at me. It's going to be, mom and dad are going to make a real mess of things if I set a boundary with them. My friends won't invite me over if I set a boundary with them. There's always going to be a part of you that does not want to set a boundary. Now, this is where it's not like absolutely correct that you should listen to that or absolutely correct that you should ignore it all the time. Like, that's not what the scope of this conversation is. That's what you have to figure out. Like, where is the dividing line? What is an okay amount of boundary to set with people? And understand that some people may not like it, which is completely normal. Yeah, so someone saying, I try to set boundaries and they still do the said thing, that's where I'd ask you, what are the consequences? When someone violates your boundary, what are the consequences? If there aren't consequences, people aren't going to respect your boundaries. And you're like, but I don't have the ability to set consequences. Okay, well, that's different. So if you're like a 14-year-old and you're under the control of your narcissistic, entitled parents, you may not be able to set a boundary with them. That's unfortunate, but it could be true. And if that's the case, that's where it's like you just got to bide your time, and time is on your side. Because eventually you'll become independent, and then you can set whatever boundaries you want to. And that's when they're going to say, I'm sorry. And that's when you're going to say, I'm happy to hear you say that, and I'm not inviting you to my wedding. Right? Good. I'm very happy to hear you say that. But I said, I'm sorry. Yeah, I understand that. Thank you so much for saying that. But we want to come. Well, it's like the psychological damage that you've done to me over the past 15 years can't be wiped away with 2 words. And maybe, you know, I'm happy that you said you're sorry. I'm happy to try to patch things up for you, but I don't think that's going to happen within 3 months. And I want my wedding to be a day where I can be like happy and free of stress. And generally speaking, that has not been my experience with you. Does that hurt? Is it an oof? Yes. And it's okay to say that. Right? You can acknowledge, you can say like, because here's the thing, when they say, I'm sorry, and you say, okay, all is forgiven, come to the wedding. What are they going to do at the wedding? Exactly what they've done for the last 15 years. right? It's the fact that they say you're sorry and you compromise your boundaries that gets you in this situation in the first place. So, and some people may be like, oh my God, this guy's such a rigid asshole. It's like, okay. I mean, I really don't think so, but I've been pushed to this. Does that make sense to you? I've tried everything else over the last 15 years and it doesn't seem to be working. So this is the best I can come up with. What if it's unfixable after the wedding? Then it's unfixable after the wedding. Right? So the only reason that things are unfixable is when one party decides that they're unfixable. Otherwise, you can keep working at it. Right? A relationship can keep on improving as long as both parties are trying. And if they feel so hurt that they're willing to sever their relationship with you because you did not invite them to their wedding, and they missed this milestone of your life, and they're willing to end the relationship, that is exactly why you're not inviting them to the wedding. It is the consequence of we will never talk to you again if we don't come to the wedding. It is that thought that they have planted in your head, which is exactly why you need to set a boundary with them. Does that make sense? So it's a beautiful sentence. What if they never talk to you again? That's like exactly what I'm saying, man. Like, look at this. Or woman. I don't know. So this is the emotional drives, compromising your boundaries. Guilt. What if they don't like me? That's how they propagate. Right? That's how people take advantage of you. Is because there are powerful emotional drivers. What if my parents never talk to me again? Right? You can, like, that's where, like, you do your dharma. So they say, like, oh, like, you know, maybe they'll say, if you don't invite us to our wedding, we're never talking to you again. And that's where you can say, like, yeah, this is exactly why I don't want you there, because anytime I try to set a limit with you, you just resort to emotional blackmail. You're threatening me with destroying a relationship when I'm setting a limit with you. This is exactly why I don't want you at my wedding. Does that make sense to you? But. No, but it's such an important occasion, then you don't want to get down the important occasion route. Okay. Yeah, I understand it's an important occasion. That's why, And then, like, when Christmas rolls around or when it's their birthday or whatever, they may say, we never want to talk to you again. You can still call them. You can still send them a card. And they get to rebuff you over and over again. And each time that you reach out the hand of peace and they swat it away, you can rest easy at night knowing that you've done your job and that this is a truly unreasonable person. So this is where, like, for 3 years on their birthday, you call them and you send them cards and they don't answer. They send your cards back. And then they find out, then you stop sending cards and they find out through social media that you have a kid. They'd love to meet their grandson. What do you say at that point? Right? I wouldn't recommend being punitive, but you can sort of, like, for 3 years, I sent you all birthday cards and called you and you didn't want any kind of relationship with me. Help me understand what's changed. Well, now we have a grandson. Okay, so I'm hearing that you don't want a relationship with me, you want a relationship with my son. Well, no, we want a relationship with you too. Then why didn't you ever answer the phone? Well, because it was hard for us. Okay. Well, I'd really appreciate it if you could think through that and help me understand what's going on. Because so far what I'm seeing is that when there's something in it for you, you answer the phone. I'm not seeing that you're demonstrating that, like, what I want out of this relationship is important at all. Well, what do you want out of the relationship? I wanted some kind of contact over the last 3 years. Well, okay, well, we'll fix it going forward, but why wasn't it fixed before? I want to understand this. Like, I'm not saying I want contact going forward. I've let go of that. I tried for 3 years to build a relationship with you and was rebuffed. What I wanted was you to answer the phone 3 years ago. Well, I can't do that. Okay, so then what are you expecting from me at this point? Got to teach people that their actions have consequences. Thanks for the gifted subs. Shall we move on? Right, so this is where like you don't want to be mean. So this is where like saying those kinds of things seems harsh, but it's not like, I hate you, you're a terrible parent. You don't want to ever say, I mean, you can imply those things if you want to, but you yourself should like let go of that crap. Does that make sense? You can say like, yeah, I understand that you want, but like you just state to them, like, I don't hear from you for 5 years, and now that you have a grandson, suddenly you're reaching out. Like, I'm so confused. Over the last 5 years, you've given me every indication that you do not want a relationship. And now I'm concerned about like this kind of person, letting this kind of person into my son's life. Because what I'm seeing from you is that when you want something, you pick up the phone. But when I want something, you don't answer. And I'm not interested in having someone like that be a central part of my son's life. Does that make sense to you? But blah, blah, blah. Okay, I heard what you said, but did you hear what I said? Does it make sense to you that I would not want someone, when I need something and I call that person, they don't answer the phone. And when they want something, they pick up the phone and call them, or call me when they need something. Do you understand? Remember, we're asking for understanding. Why I would not want that kind of person as part of my son's life? Well, but. Okay. So then they dissimulate again, right? So then you can say, okay, so this is part of the problem, is that I've said something to you twice and I'm not hearing you acknowledge it at all. So I'm going to go ahead and hang up now. In order for this to work, you need to be able to acknowledge and understand my perspective, which is exactly what I think the problem has been thus far. Goodbye. If my parents learn these techniques, I'm done for. You're damn right you are. We're teaching it to them. Because here's the thing. Generally speaking, when parents learn these techniques, the kids hate it for like 3 months, and then their life starts getting better, and then they're grateful. Sorry. But yeah. So at this point, it's irreversible? No, it's not irreversible, but like they need to acknowledge, right? It's not irreversible. But it's like, unless they're going to make some acknowledgement of what you've been through and demonstrate some kind of understanding, then like you're just signing yourself up for more of the same. So this is the kind of thing where if y'all are stuck in life, chances are it's not because your parents were too harsh. Chances are they did a bad job of setting boundaries on you. And for those of you who say, my parents were super controlling is not the same as setting boundaries. This is important to understand. So like being super controlling is usually about arbitrary boundary enforcement. If you think your parents were like set to, I mean, like, does that make sense? Your parents didn't do the crap that I was telling you. This is good parenting. This is how you set a boundary with a child. You let them know what's coming. You give them an opportunity to act in the right way. You give them ample opportunity to act in the right way. You make sure everyone is on the same page. You make sure they understand. You ask them for feedback, even as a parent. What do you think about that? I think that 1 week was way too harsh. And that's when you can say, okay, fine. So if you think it was too harsh, it sounds like you're adhering now. So if you make a mistake again, it'll be like 3 days. How does that sound to you? And that's when the kid is like stuck. Because it's like you're moving in the right direction. So do they throw it in your face and say no? And you're like, okay. Or do they take the win? Do they take the W and build a relationship with you? And do you demonstrate to them, or do they choose to be pissed? No, it doesn't matter. Okay. Well, let me know if you change your mind. And then they step over the line again. If you want to be like a good parent, then what you do is, hey, you remember last time when I asked you, you make a mistake again, are we going to ban it for a week? Or are we going to ban it for 3 days? And you said it doesn't matter. I'm curious, which one should we do this time? And then the kid is like, what's your angle? My angle is that I'm your parent and I love you and I want you to do well in school, but I don't want to harshly punish you. And you said that last time it was harsh punishment. And then when I asked you about 3 days, like, you didn't seem to care. So I'm asking you again, like, which one do you think is more appropriate? 3 days. It's like, okay, cool. So if you screw up on Thursday or Friday, because today's Monday, then we're probably going to have to push out to a week. But if you can manage Thursday and Friday fine and you're fine all next week, like 3 days seems more appropriate. What do you think? Like, nah. So setting healthy boundaries is like really good for kids. It's how you learn how to regulate yourself. So many of the problems in our community is because parents haven't set healthy boundaries on you. They haven't taught you how to set healthy boundaries, which is why you don't you don't set them with other people. Y'all get that? Right? So like, and that's why like no one teaches us this stuff. No one teaches parents this stuff. It's not their fault. We're not saying that parents are like bad people. It's just like no one teaches this crap. And like, can you imagine how hard it is to be a parent in today's day and age? Where it's like, there are people like grooming other people on the internet and your parents have to try to keep you safe. Your fucking dumbass 15-year-old self. They're trying to keep you safe. It's so stressful. And like now they have to deal with like addictive video games. Right? Like that's so much worse. It's like so much harder. It's like screwing up kids' brains even more. And so it's like, it's not easy for them. And I think generally speaking, I mean, hopefully you have parents who love you. If you don't, you have my sincere apologies. But it's hard. And sometimes like, you know, the simplest job of a parent is to keep a child from screwing themselves over. It's like, you know, that's like literally like what your job is as a parent. Is like just to, you know, kid is like playing with a paper clip and an electrical socket. And it's like, you need to stop that, right? Kid is like, I'm going to jump off the roof and fly. Like, you need to stop that. Kid is like, I'm going to destroy my sense of habit and dopamine circuitry through excessive gaming. It's like, as a parent, like, you need to stop that. We're not saying don't play games. We're not saying don't let your kids play games. We're saying like, we're not saying also, remember, no gaming on weekdays after 10 p.m., okay? On a weekday, on a school night. We're not saying no gaming on weekdays. Healthy gamer. Yeah, absolutely. So I see that a lot of people are asking questions about OCD and PTSD, stuff like that. I think, do you set boundaries differently with kids with ADHD? They just become, so these are all good questions. I think first thing is that, you know, if you're dealing with someone who has these problems or you yourself have these problems, definitely a good idea to talk to a provider about it. But generally speaking, I'd say yes, it does modify the implementation of all of these things. So for example, someone with complex PTSD may be a lot more vulnerable to their internal emotional drives than the average person. This is a case-by-case basis. This is why you need to talk to a clinician, because it's not like, I can't think of as, I haven't read a single study about boundary setting as a person with CPTSD before. So I don't know if there's research on that. That gets to that level of specificity. That's why you need a clinician. But generally speaking, I find that people who have experienced trauma or have a particular samskar or things like that, there's a part of this process that these aren't equally difficult parts of the process. Some people are really good at articulating. Some people are really good at like, you know, dealing with the emotional stuff. Some people are really good at emotionally processing afterward. Some people are like emotionally terrified of ever speaking to someone after setting a boundary with them. Right? So that's where, you know, it just kind of depends. ADHD, this is very important for ADHD. So there's a lot of stuff about like boundary setting where, because of the attentional component, the anticipatory part is very important with ADHD. So that's where like you need to let them know, like not just the Saturday before the Monday, let them know a week ahead of time, 5 days, 3 days, the day before. Lots of reminders. Because of their variable attention, it may not sink in. This is also why you want to have them articulate their understanding. Because this is where like a lot of times what happens is kids with ADHD, who are usually smart, will use context clues to figure out what you want them to say. It's tricky. They don't actually hear you. They're just so friggin' smart that they figure out what the right answer is. And so what you want to do with ADHD is make sure you articulate their understanding and give them lots and lots of anticipatory guidance. And also I would suggest being like less harsh with consequences and give them slow it down with ADHD. Like more warnings, smaller steps, a lot of conversation in between. Right? So there are modifications for sure. At what age can you start setting boundaries? Like less than 1. Right? So no hitting daddy in the face. You can say that to, a 9-month-old who's angry at you. Like, right? So we don't pull the cat's tail. We don't pour water on the computer. Like you can say these things to a 1-year-old. Okay. Let's take a quick look. Okay, we're going to do poll. So we've got 2 options. We would probably no. I guess we actually don't have 2 options because we have to teach meditation. And I have meditation as part of 1. Enforcing with a 1-year-old is actually easier than enforcing with a teenager, let me tell you what. You guys want to talk more about boundaries, or you want to do? Nah, we got to do meditation. So we got to do this post. Nope, wrong one. Chat. Okay. Okay, this is a good one. Yep, we're going to desperately lonely men. Okay. Dr. K should address the men desperately looking for partners. Hello and welcome to my controversial post. I feel I poorly expressed my point. Here's my updated post. I've seen so many posts from my fellow men expressing how they feel about being alone. I fully admit I myself have done it and even tired of seeing the same basic premise. I, for one, can't imagine how the female members feel, but I imagine they feel objected and annoyed. I'm aware this is a contentious topic. As a dude who is single and lonely in a new job, new city, and new everything, I get it. However, most posts say the same stuff. I'm horny and alone. No woman will love me because I'm ugly. I don't talk to women and none like me. I don't go out and talk to women and I'm angry about that. I just want a girlfriend for sex or for intimacy, which isn't really healthy. The reasons are inherently bad and really won't get you to your goal. Many of my fellow men wallow in loneliness and feel sex and romantic intimacy will get them what they want, and it may for a time. However, if you don't love you, if you aren't okay with you, if you're not the person you want to love, then you'll likely have issues with the relationship. I'm no expert, but I'm a guy, and I can tell you that while being horny and alone sucks, being in a toxic relationship is worse than hell. Work on yourself, bros. Focus on you, but most importantly, put yourself out there and remember that rejection is rejection. To the guys who are emotionally abused, valid, and don't know how to talk to women. I was cheated on, valid, and I don't feel comfortable with women. These guys need help and time. Don't jump into dating. Take time to focus on you, and that's the core of it. You need to focus on you no matter who you are. If you come off as desperate, depressed, angry, or women are just reproductive organs, then you'll likely keep incurring the same problem. While I sympathize with you guys, we need to focus on us and not make sex and a relationship the goal. Here's my original post. I, as a man, am tired of seeing my fellow lonely men cry about being alone. I fully admit I myself have done it and am even tired of it. I, for one, can't imagine how the female members feel. Why am I tired of it? Because they say the same stuff. I'm horny and alone. No women will be able to love me because I'm ugly. I don't talk to women and none like me. I was emotionally abused, valid, and don't know how to talk to women. I was cheated on, valid, and I don't feel comfortable with women. The first half where the guy is, in essence, horny and alone is so overdone. I'm sorry, guys, but holy moly, if you want to meet women, you need a social life, and if that's all your goal is, then your desperation will precede you. No one likes desperate. So many of my fellow men wallow in loneliness and feel sex and romantic intimacy will get them what they want, and it may be for a time. However, if you don't love you, if you aren't okay with you, if you're not the person you want to love, then you'll likely have issues with the relationship. I'm no expert, but I am a guy, and I can tell you that while being horny and alone sucks, being in a toxic relationship is worse than hell. Work on yourself, bros. Focus on you, but most importantly, put yourself out there and remember that rejection is rejection. Mods, updated for clarity of opinions. Mods, feel free to delete this if it's too toxic. Okay. So, this is a fantastic post, first of all, because I think we're learning as a community, right? So I think this post comes across as more invalidating, harsher. This post, I think, is a little bit more nuanced, in depth, which is wonderful. And so I do want to talk to y'all today a little bit about this issue. And what I'm sort of talking about is that there are a lot of posts out there, there are a lot of people out there who feel lonely and desperate. They want love, or they want sex, or they want all of the above. They want intimacy. And sometimes they feel incredibly frustrated. They feel like the world is an unfair place. They feel like, they've been dealt a crappy hand of cards, which essentially dooms them to loneliness. They feel desperate. And sometimes when we feel desperate and we don't get something that we want, we really want to blame the whole world for our situation, which isn't necessarily wrong, right? So let's just acknowledge for a moment that a lot of things about our life are not determined by us. Like the fact that I am not the son of a billionaire, or that, I had abusive parents, or like all these things are karma. They're not determined by us. So the truth of the matter is that sometimes things like not everything that we do is our fault. Not all of our circumstances are our fault. In fact, most of our circumstances aren't our fault. There's also where there are all kinds of other like karmic things which can make relationships easy for you. So for example, did you grow up with an intact household? Did you learn from your parents how to navigate conflict? Did you learn from your parents how to express feelings? Did you learn from your parents how to respect boundaries? Did you learn from your parents how to lay boundaries? So some of us who grew up with good households, loving households, learn a lot of this stuff intrinsically, and it kind of gets baked in at a very young age. There's also a lot of stuff about self-worth here, because if you don't feel good about yourself and you're desperate and hungry and horny and alone and you want intimacy, people sort of believe that the desperation carries through, and since I'm ugly and I'm desperate, I'm screwed. No one will ever love me. And those feelings are like completely valid. Even some of the points that they make are completely valid. Now, a lot of times what will happen is at some point, like in this discussion, people will start talking about society, right? They'll say like, society is this, society is that. I've made that mistake before. So let me just start by sort of saying the way we're going to address this today is not by talking about society. It's not about like what society does for us or doesn't do for us. These are all valid and important discussions. I'm not saying they aren't. So for example, the role of masculinity is rapidly changing. Men face particular problems, women face particular problems, non-binary people face particular problems. I'm not trying to invalidate any of those perspectives. At the same time, when I see these kinds of issues, what I hear is you're desperate, you're lonely, sure you had a rough life, and the desperation will precede you. And you have to focus on yourself. You have to learn to love yourself. You have to be happy with yourself to enter into a healthy relationship. We hear all these truisms. Does anyone tell us how? Does anyone say, here is how you love yourself? Here are the steps. So here's what I find is the biggest problem that men in this situation run into. Is that I find that it's very difficult for them to think about someone else's needs, okay? So there are a lot of lonely and desperate men in this situation. And you can sort of say, like, work on yourself first, and then you can sort of enter into a relationship. But the truth of the matter is that, like, this is not easy to do. So we have this concept, right, of, like, bringing yourself up by your bootstraps. And we kind of think about this in the financial sense, that, like, you can be a self-made millionaire. But the truth of the matter is that, like, it's way easier to have good financial circumstances at the get-go when you launch on your financial journey. That leads to a lot more success than pulling yourself up by the nature of your own, strength and guts and all that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing is that this is true from an emotional and relationship standpoint as well. Like, self-worth is oftentimes given to you, which is weird because it's sort of self-worth, right? But if we think about kids who grow up confident and loved, like, they have a huge advantage. So if you're someone who's lonely and desperate, people say work on yourself first, but like, working on yourself, I know it's kind of weird, but is rarely a solo pursuit. So this is the first thing, is we can say work on yourself, and we will teach you how to work on yourself, so don't worry about that. But let's just acknowledge how hard it is to work on yourself. And this doesn't apply to men only, by the way, right? So this is like, sure, there are a lot of men who face this situation, but it's like, if you're someone who is desperate for connection, feeling lonely, feeling horny, craving intimacy, and that desperation precedes you, you come across as clingy, you come across as pathetic, you come across as desperate, you tend to drive people away. That's a really hard thing to overcome, because like, let's just think a little bit about how does that person overcome that? Sure, you can do this mythical internal work. You can go to India and stay at an ashram for tons and tons of months and years and study to become a monk. But the truth is, even in my own life, like, I had a woman who accepted me and, far before I accepted myself. So the truth of the matter is that human beings are community creatures. We're community organisms. We're not like most human growth, just historically, does not happen in a cabin in the woods, right? Human growth and human connection and like becoming who you are happens with mentorship, happens with like, hopefully parental love, your bros who are there for you, siblings who are there for you, your girls who are there for you. It comes from other people. Even studies of borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder clearly demonstrate the value of social connection. And we know that social capital, there have been tons of study about the positive impacts of social capital on mental health. So being a part of community that cares about you is huge for your own sense of identity. And so how do we navigate this? Because like, the truth is that like, unfortunately, it's very hard to just learn how to love yourself, just all on your own. So it can be done. But I think if we really look at the way that the majority of people learn how to respect themselves, it actually comes with some interaction from other people. So how do we tackle this problem? The first thing that we have to be super careful about is misdiagnosis, okay? So I don't mean this in a clinical sense, but I mean that oftentimes when human beings when they face a problem, their mind generates an answer. But the mind isn't really like critical about it, right? So if you think about why am I alone, your mind will say, oh, because I'm ugly or because I'm desperate. And I just reek desperation from my pores. But if we really think about, let's say you've had a set of relationships, you've gone on dates and things like that. The reason that you're alone isn't just what you think in your head. Actually, the best sources of information are going to be the people that you date, right? The tricky thing is that oftentimes we don't really respect boundaries. We don't have good ways of collecting feedback. We don't know how to interact with those people. So we don't really know why they choose not to date us again. And then we formulate our own conclusions. But what are those conclusions based on? They're based on our own biases. It must be because I'm ugly. It must be because I'm desperate. Whereas in my experience, the biggest thing that lonely men tend to miss, and once again, it's not just men, is that they feel desperate, and so they think that desperation comes through. But oftentimes, it becomes about your own needs. So it's not the fact that you're desperate, it's that you're starving so bad that you don't have space to share, right? So you're starving, and then you get a sandwich. And you're so starving that all you can think about is eating that sandwich. And it feels so good to finally get some food. That in that process of you getting your own needs met, you don't have space for another person in that relationship. So when you're starving and you get a sandwich, it's so hard to tear that sandwich in half or give half of the sandwich to your partner. So the first thing that I tend to notice in these kinds of people is that there is a focus on the self, which is not it's not their fault. I don't blame them for having this. Because this is what tends to happen is like, the starving person thinks about eating themselves. Like, why are they in that situation? It's because they're starving. So it's like a natural consequence of being alone, of being starved for affection, for being starved from intimacy. And so then what happens is like when you enter into a relationship, there just isn't space for the other person. So it's not that they're avoiding you because you're desperate and ugly. It's because like there isn't a relationship for them to participate in. There's just needs to be met. And this is how sometimes women feel objectified, because in a sense they are, right? Because like you're busy getting your needs met. And once again, it's not, we're sort of adopting a male to female kind of perspective, but it can be the other way around too. Where like when you enter into a relationship with someone who's starving, there's going to be a period of time where like they don't have the bandwidth to take care of you. And the tricky thing is that sometimes even desperate, lonely men will be on the other side of the table in an equally toxic way, where they enter into relationships where they are the giver, the giver, the giver, the giver, the giver. Because they know, they can empathically, they know what it's like to be alone and starve for affection. The problem is that that's not sustainable. So you're the giver, the giver, the giver, the giver, the giver. And then as you give and you give and you give and you give and you give, your partner potentially starts to feel healthier. And then something falls apart because this is not a healthy, even relationship. So either they become dependent on you or they become independent of you, in which case the only thing that you have to give is what you give. And so the premise of the relationship is lopsided and it can't grow into an equal relationship. So it's really tricky. It's scary. One of the most terrifying things I've ever seen for people who are insecure, who take care of other people in relationships, the most terrifying thing is that the person that I am taking care of will no longer need my help. Because what I bring to them is taking care of them. And if they no longer need me, if they no longer need the care I provide, then they no longer need me. And in the worst situations, this actually turns into sabotage. Where like, I'm afraid you're going to leave me if you get better. And that's where the relationship has to grow, right? It has to turn into something else. Otherwise, it can't survive. So first thing that you've got to be careful about is misdiagnosis. Be careful about what your mind generates and what's the quality of information. Have you had a series of long and honest conversations between people who are like comfortable with sharing this information about what challenges they had with you in the relationship? Because unless you're getting that information from your partner, chances are you really have no idea. And this is where like even after a breakup, you may have like a single conversation or people may be emotional. So I hate you because you did this and you did that. That's not like a real conversation. That's just people venting emotionally. So first thing is be careful about misdiagnosis. The second thing is that if you're in this situation, okay, how can you work on yourself? How can you work on how can you make space for other people? So today what I'm going to talk to you all about is actually really interesting. It's about metta meditation. So I think metta meditation or loving kindness meditation is a particular branch of meditation that's designed to develop gratitude and compassion towards yourself and other people. And the really fascinating thing about metta meditation, we're going to look at a little bit of science, and we're going to look at the substance of metta meditation. What we'll actually see is that all of the problems that these people suffer from are sort of fixed in a nuanced way through metta meditation. So the first thing is that when I'm lonely and desperate, the only person I'm thinking about is myself. That's not really, I don't really consider it selfishness. So I'm not saying that these people are selfish, but it's more just that I'm so preoccupied with myself. Even in the relationship, I'm so preoccupied with myself. Oh my God, am I coming across as desperate? Oh my God, I'm so ugly. This isn't selfishness, it is focus on the self. You can't stop thinking about yourself in these relationships. It's not necessarily a good way. You're not like, oh my God, I'm so beautiful. But literally there is not space in your cognition for another human being. I'm so busy thinking about how ugly I am, I'm not paying attention to the fact that the person that I'm dating is blushing when I give them a compliment and clearly feels that I'm out of their league. Right? Because they may be feeling that. But when I feel like I'm an ugly person, like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And if I think I'm ugly, then that's what I think I'm going to be. I'm going to completely ignore the other person's perspective. So the first thing that metta meditation does is helps us move outside of ourselves and to think about other people. The second thing that metta meditation does, which we'll talk about in a second, is helps us accept that we are not in complete control of things. So the other damaging thing about sort of lonely, desperate men is that there's a determinism to it, right? I'm desperate, I'm ugly, therefore this is fixed and I'm screwed. And then in the worst cases, what happens is people start to like hate the opposite sex, right? So it's not necessarily just men, because we're sort of seeing this with women too, where we can start to like assume all kinds of things about the opposite sex. So what we need to do is step away from that determinism. We need to step away from the fact that like everything is laid out. We need to encourage some sense of like a question mark when it comes to the future. Because when I'm lonely and desperate and the future is hopeless, a question mark is a movement in the right direction. So we'll see how metta meditation does that. The next thing is that there are all kinds of different aspects from a scientific perspective. So we'll take a quick look at a paper that talk a little bit about these, let me find this right thing. So there are all kinds of things that metta meditation has been shown to do, and these are the things that I truly believe need to be focused on by this population. So if we look at men who have difficulty being empathic, difficulty loving themselves, difficulty loving other people, this is where the attitude of like, you know, the partners that they end up with feel used, right? And why is that? And it's because like sometimes we have difficulty like acknowledging that another person is a person. So let's just take a quick look at a paper. So this is a study from, what page is this for? Okay. So this is, can compassion meditation contribute to the development of psychotherapists' empathy? So this is looking at meditation like metta meditation. It's a really great review. Highly recommend it. But I'm going to highlight this actually. So, since very few studies of loving kindness and self-compassion focus exclusively on healthcare professionals, let us consider the impact of these meditation practices in the general population. So interestingly enough, what I'm sharing with y'all is not about psychotherapists or caregivers, but is about the general population. So self-compassion has been linked to less anxiety and depression. Do you think this will help the lonely, desperate male? I think so. Greater wisdom and emotional intelligence. What are you feeling? What drives you emotionally? What are your emotional needs that get met? Do you think this is important for the lonely, desperate male? I think so. As well as feelings of social connectedness and life satisfaction. Do you think this is important for the lonely, desperate male? Self-compassion also fosters the intrinsic motivation to learn and grow. It promotes health-related behaviors, and it is beneficial for interpersonal relationships. Does this sound important to the lonely, desperate male? So in their study examining the link between self-compassion and concern for the well-being of others, Neff and Pommier observed a modest correlation between self-compassion and empathic concern, but a more robust negative link between personal distress and self-compassion. Okay? So, if we think about the dimensions that, for lack of a better term, the lonely, desperate male needs to improve on. Depression and anxiety? Hell yeah. Social connectedness? Absolutely. You know, emotional awareness and wisdom? Motivation to like grow as a human being? Absolutely. Right? Improve like health promoting behaviors? Like absolutely. And most importantly, removing that negative distress correlation with self-compassion. So the way that you feel about yourself. So we're going to flash back to this post for a second. So the way that you feel about yourself, right? So let's go to the unfiltered one. I'm horny and alone. No women will ever love me because I'm ugly. I don't talk to women. None like me. I was emotionally abused. I don't feel comfortable. This is all that negative distress, which people sort of assume is the desperation that women can sniff. They can smell desperation from a mile away. In my experience, I think that's kind of like it's an unfair characterization of women because in my experience, actually, Desperation doesn't necessarily cause people to run away. It just means that you can't form a healthy relationship with them, not because you're desperate, but because like a healthy relationship requires two people caring about each other. I know tons of people, not just women, who are compassionate and are willing to help desperate people. In fact, my experience has largely been that when someone is desperate, that brings out the best of people in terms of how much we try to help people and support people. And I've talked to lots of women who have tried to date men like this. And what I usually find is that they try really hard, right? They'll try to be supportive. They'll try to be kind. They'll date them for a while, but there's just such a thick shell of self-loathing that like you just can't fix that, right? I'm not saying there aren't bad women out there. I'm not saying there aren't bad men out there. I'm not saying that desperation brings out the Dalai Lama out of every human being on the planet. But I think that we have to be a little bit careful about the conclusions that we form. And I know that there are a lot of people, especially in our community, who are fixers, right? Who actually like have their best foot forward when it comes to helping another human being. They find their dharma. They try to help someone, improve their situation. I feel confident about that in terms of our community. But what do we see here? We see this negative distress. And when we have this negative distress, what we tend to find is that it reduces our sense of compassion. It reduces our empathy towards other people. And once self-compassion is gone, toxicity comes out. Once there's a lack of empathy for the person on the other side of the table, that relationship is kind of severely handicapped. And the cool thing is that metta meditation can help. Okay? So we're going to talk for a second about metta meditation. So metta meditation is called also known as loving kindness meditation. And we're going to talk to you all a little bit. We're going to go through it. We're going to do it at the end of stream today together. But before we do that, we're going to do we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the components of it, okay? So this is where what we want to kind of look at is, first of all, metta means kindness. And I think metta is a Pali word, so it's not Sanskrit. So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. And why is this important? So let's remember that if we're talking about someone who is, let's say, the lonely, desperate male or person, the first thing to understand is that oftentimes, you have thoughts like ugly, I'm desperate. These are people who are starved for affection. So how do you think they feel about themselves, right? So they have a very, what's the right word? Harsh view of self. And then this then projects out into a harsh view of the world, right? Because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And when my eyes are so used to seeing a harsh view of the self, what I end up seeing is a harsh view of the world as well. And if we look at these people, they have difficulty with empathy. They have difficulty with compassion. They have difficulty with social connectedness, as we've sort of already talked about. They also have difficulty with things like depression and anxiety. Negative feelings, worries is maybe another way to put it, right? And then they also have difficulty with like life forward choices, for lack of a better term. So this includes things like health promotion behaviors. But I would say on a deeper level, it's more like when we say work on yourself, that involves all kinds of like things about moving your life forward. And they struggle with motivation in these things. And let's understand how that works. Okay? So now, how can cultivating a capacity for kindness help with these sorts of things? So let's kind of think about that. So the first is, metta meditation involves kindness towards the self. And this is important for the life forward motivation. And why is that? It's because when I don't think I'm worth it, I'm not worth fixing. So it's like if I have low value, like I want y'all to think about the oldest computer you have in your house that doesn't work anymore. And I want you to think about how worth it is it to fix that computer, which is probably why it's like sitting, if you're like me, it's like sitting in your garage. It's like 2 decades old. And it's just like we haven't thrown it out because we may need it one day. But it's not really worth fixing. And so when we think a little bit about, how our brain calculates like what's worth fixing, it's the things that are valuable. And if I'm not valuable, I'm not worth fixing. And this is what makes it hard to work on myself. So we can say work on yourself, but like it's hard because it's not, it's like, what's the point? So this is important to develop kindness towards yourself. And I think metta meditation needs to be modified, in my opinion. We'll talk about that in a second. So we sort of dealt with this, okay? Second thing is when we develop empathy and compassion, there's room for someone else in the relationship. And this is important because, generally speaking, I don't think it's the desperation that drives people away. I mean, it can, for sure. But I choose to believe that people are not so selfish as that. And, it's not the desperation, which you can also get cognitively reinforced because if they try to help you and, you're so unwilling to help them or be helped by them that eventually they get fed up and they have to leave. And then what you conclude is that, oh, I'm too desperate, and they smelled it and they ran away. Whereas that person is going to have an experience of that relationship, which oftentimes is where the misdiagnosis comes in. We don't really talk to them about it, right? Because we're not really able to hear it. And when I have a cognitive bias that I'm a low value person and someone says, yeah, I tried to help you and I just it wasn't working. And you're like, oh, that means I couldn't be helped. I'm unhelpable. So that's what your mind is going to conclude with. This is exactly what you see in therapies. When you have people who have very low self-worth, they will take whatever you say and they will spin it in the worst possible thing and they will use it as evidence to reinforce their existing beliefs. So when you develop empathy and compassion for other people, there's going to be room for someone else in the relationship. And then this in turn is going to reduce the feeling of being an object. Potentially for you and the other person in the relationship. This is huge. So then we kind of talk a little bit about social connectedness. And I think this essentially follows from this. Right? So as you connect with another human being, as you acknowledge yourself as a person, as you acknowledge the other person as a person, now two people can connect. And now it's not about desperate getting your needs met in starvation. It's about two human beings forming a relationship. And as we do all of these things, we can actually set ourselves up to actually engage in healthy relationships. So now the question becomes, okay, so if I've convinced you at this point, then now we get to the how. So what is this metta meditation and how does it work? So I'm going to talk to you all about traditional metta meditation. And when I do metta meditation, my kind of modified or digital generation metta meditation, because I think some things have changed. So traditionally, when you do metta meditation, what you'll do is you'll start with some kind of phrase. So may you be happy. May you be free. May you be at peace. So you'll repeat this thought directed towards a particular group of people or person. So you'll just literally practice wishing for the object of your metta that these things happen to them. May this person be happy, may this person be free, and may this person be at peace. Now, there are a couple of important things here. 3 really important elements. The first is the word may. This moves away from determinism. And if we look at this is all deterministic. Like if we talk to people who are desperate and alone, they have a very deterministic view of the world. No women will love me because I'm ugly. Deterministic statement. I don't talk to women and none like me. Deterministic statement. I'm emotionally abused and don't know how to talk to women. Deterministic statement. I don't feel comfortable with women. Even deterministic. Right? It doesn't say I sometimes. It's all flat. It may be valid. We're not saying it's wrong, but it's deterministic. So like, I want you to just think about this for a second. If this person said, it may be hard for some women to love me because of the way that I look, versus no women will love me because I'm ugly. Which of those statements is healthier? I don't talk to women and none like me versus it's hard for me to talk to women and some of them don't like me. Do you all see the difference between those 2 statements? So literally, metta meditation starts by getting away from determinism. It acknowledges that there are things outside of my control and that the future is not set in stone. So it practices this faculty. Second thing it does is moves focus away from the self. This is the other problem that these kinds of people have, is that if you look at this sort of internal sense of distress, this is a very self-focused distress. Personal distress. So we need to move away from that personal element. We need to practice and train our mind to think about the thoughts and feelings and experiences of others. Sure, I'm lonely and starved for affection, but what does this person need? What is their experience of this interaction? So we need to move away from the I and move towards the you. And the third element, which is really important, is just the cultivation of positivity. Now, this is sort of a tightrope, to be sure. So it's very easy for the cultivation of positivity to move into denial of toxicity. So we want to be accepting, we want to be positive, but we don't want to invalidate or deny the experience of negativity or toxicity. But we can absolutely hope for and wish for positivity. So may this person be free, may this person be happy, may this person be at peace. Now, traditionally, so these actually we're going to keep. These are all the same. And in terms of the modified, I think what we've really done is understand the components of metta meditation. I don't know that people explain this stuff when they teach metta meditation. They just say, you just need to repeat this stuff. So what we try to add in our modified metta meditation is an understanding of the psychology at play here when you cultivate these kinds of thoughts. Now, traditionally, these thoughts are directed towards 5 sets of people. The first is they're directed towards the self. So you say, may I be happy? Or like you kind of externalize yourself a little bit. So we'll kind of talk about that. But you don't say I. You say envision yourself and direct that happiness towards yourself, almost as an external person. Like close your eyes and imagine like a bird's eye view of like you sitting in a room and like look at that person and try to say, may this person be happy. May this person be free, and may this person be at peace. You can use I if you want to. Second thing is traditionally, they would then direct it towards a guru or teacher. Okay. Third thing is they direct it towards a friend. Fourth thing is direct it towards a neutral party. Fifth thing is they direct it towards an enemy. So if we kind of think a little bit about wishing these thoughts, traditionally, metta people believe that it's easy to wish for yourself happiness. We all want happiness for ourselves. Next thing is that this is back in the day of gurus. So it's like easy to like want happiness and peace and stuff for your guru because they're your teacher, you respect them, etc. Next thing is it's easy to direct good vibes towards friends. Harder to direct good vibes towards, because this is someone who's doing a lot for you. So you have presumably natural gratitude directed towards this. So we all have self-love. We all have gratitude. Friends is like maybe less so than someone who's like teaching you this stuff, but you know, you have good vibes pretty easily. Harder is towards people who are neutral, and the hardest is to try to love or wish good things for your enemies. Now, in the modern day, I think this changes. So the first is that I think this is just someone you respect. So I would start with someone that you respect and appreciate. It doesn't have to be a friend. So if you've had like, you know, a teacher who's had a large impact on your life, like an uncle or family member who's been very positive towards you, I think we want to step away from sort of the spiritual traditions in some ways. So I think definitely here we want to do that. So you don't have to direct it towards a guru. Second thing is we're going to do friend. And can you wish for your friend to be happy? Can you say to yourself authentically that may this person be happy, may this person be free, may this person be at peace? Can you say that for someone that you respect? Can you say that for a friend of yours? Generally speaking, I hope so. Now, this is where things get interesting. Depending on how you feel about yourself, self is either number 3 or number 4. So when you think about yourself, I think it's unfortunate, but a lot of people that I've worked with can't view themselves even lower than neutral. So if they say to them, if they start to send good vibes towards themselves, and by good vibes, I mean literally repeating these thoughts with as much authenticity as you can muster and compassion as you can muster, it feels wrong. It's like, I don't actually deserve that crap. I'm a POS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If that's the case, that's okay. We're going to move you down to the higher difficulty. No problem. So can you direct them towards someone you respect and someone who you appreciate? Someone, a friend of yours? Good. Someone neutral? Then yourself. And then lastly, an enemy. So this is what I would say is easier for modern day metta meditation. Maybe self is number 3, maybe self is number 1, and you can do it, and that's totally fine. But the goal here is to try to remember that when we're trying to cultivate a new faculty in the mind, what we want to do is try to reduce the conflict in our mind. So we want to start with the thing that's easiest. It's almost like we're going to play the tutorial before we get to level 1. And then we're going to play level 1, and then we're going to play level 2, and we're going to play level 3. Now, the question is, like back in the day, this was the tutorial, this was level 1, this was level 2. We may have to move that around a little bit because we've changed as people. And even if you look at like old texts from the karmic religions, they sort of say that meditation techniques need to be sort of reinterpreted, which is why we have multiple teachers. So there were various incarnations of Vishnu, and these people got revered as divine, right? So we're probably spiritual teachers, essentially. Jury's out on whether they're truly divine or whatever. We're going to stay clear of that metaphysics for today. And then like later, their teachings were reinterpreted by the Buddha for a different group of people. And then he developed, Buddhism. And then later those, teachings have been reinterpreted by people like the Dalai Lama, by people like, Eckhart Tolle, like all these other teachers that have come. Even your local meditation teacher or yoga teacher will offer their own perspective and people will gravitate to them. So these teachings, which may be true, continuously get reinterpreted. And so based on like my understanding of the population that we kind of, in the world that we live in, like this may be easier. And the goal is to authentically cultivate compassion towards these objects. And to formulate that compassion in this particular phrasing, which I think the phrasing is powerful and specific. And there's a reason why it's structured that way. So now we're going to practice metta meditation. And the goal here is that we're going to cultivate hopefully all of these things. And we know, actually, interestingly enough, scientifically, that this works, right? So we have data from scientific studies that show that these are the outcomes that we can expect from a rigorous metta meditation practice. Okay? So let's go to the practice itself. So like I mentioned, there's going to be, may you be happy, may you be free, and may you be at peace. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to repeat each of these phrases 3 times while directing it towards a particular person. And what I want you to do is just in yourself, try to muster up as much authentic compassion as you can. So when you like really want something, like, man, I really hope Elden Ring is not a disappointment. Man, I can't wait to play Elden Ring. Man, it's so awesome. Or when someone says, oh yeah, I just started playing Elden Ring. You're like, dude, you are in for a treat. Or, man, that sucks. I'm so sorry for you. So this is where you can generate an authentic emotional experience when thinking about someone else. I'm so excited for you. Oh, you've never been to Hawaii? It's amazing, man. You're going to have the time of your life. I really hope you have a fantastic vacation. So you can generate authentic, compassionate statements directed towards other people. So we're going to try to do that with these 3 phrases. And so what I want you to do is, as best as you can, hope that this person really kind of put it out into the universe that, like, may this person be happy, may this person be free of worries, or free, and may this person be at peace. I hope they don't stress. I hope they don't suffer. And so we're going to pick someone that you respect or you appreciate first, and we're going to say this 3 times. I'm going to do it silently, but you can do it out loud if you want to. And so imagine that person, picture them in your mind, and then repeat each phrase 3 times. So, and you can do it kind of in order. So may you be happy, may you be free, may you be at peace. May you be happy, may you be free, may you be at peace. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to a friend. And then we're going to move on to a neutral person. And then we're going to move on to ourselves. And then we're going to move on to someone we dislike. Okay? And I want you to just notice the natural cultivation of the feelings that you get. If you wind up feeling really positive towards yourself, then you can absolutely move yourself to the top of the list. You can also, you don't have to do the whole practice with all people right away, but we're going to do that today. Okay? So we're going to sit up straight. Who's first is respected, someone that you respect or appreciate. Okay? So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. And now imagine the first person, someone you respect and appreciate. Breathe in and out. Picture them in your mind. And repeat your metta phrases. 3 phrases, 3 times each. Begin. And now we're going to move on to a friend. So imagine a friend, someone who you care about. And now repeat our metta kindness meditation towards them. May you be happy. May you be free. May you be at peace. And now we're going to move on to a neutral person. Just imagine someone that you've interacted with in the last few days. Picture them as best as possible. Take a moment to kind of focus your mind on that person. And now send them metta, kindness, through our 3 phrases. And now picture yourself, almost as if you were floating above in the room. See yourself sitting there. And now direct metta towards yourself. May you be happy. May you be free. May you be at peace. And now direct it towards someone who you have negative feelings towards. Picture that person. Notice that it may be a little bit harder to recall or call up those feelings of compassion, but try anyway. Fix that person in your mind and send metta to them. May you be happy. May you be free. May you be at peace. 2 more rounds in your mind. And now put your hands together in Namaste position as we begin to bring the practice to a close. And notice all of the world swirling around you. Things that you have to do, responsibilities that you have, goals that you have, wants that you have, unfulfilled desires, pressures, worries. And that in this moment, you can find some modicum of peace as the rest of the world feels outside of you. And give thanks for this moment and for the situation that you're in, for the person that you are. Find gratitude for whatever you can in this moment as authentically as you can. And with one final breath, as you exhale, give thanks and open your eyes. to be banished to the metta realm. That's great. All right, chat, who are you rating? Well, first time chat, Ninetail cried. That's okay. Hopefully tears of goodness or badness. Let it out. Let it all out. I ended up crying a lot. No problem. It's all stuff that needs to get out there. So good. So remember that emotional numbness is something that oftentimes we feel. So meditation helps us connect with ourselves, potentially boosts EQ. Okay, we're going to raid Destiny or Ryan Higa or who? I'm seeing all kinds of people. Kinashi Vivo. Okay, we can raid Destiny. He's playing League and needs some metta. Okay, well, maybe y'all can teach it to him. See one, do one, teach one. Right? So try to practice this every day. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, ideally 20 minutes of meditation is when we really start to see all the clinical trials that are looking at these improvements usually are looking at 20 minutes of practice a day. So if you want to see that kind of progress, that's really what you need to commit to. Okay, so good luck. We'll see you all on Friday.